Maya Reyes had been a nurse for 11 months when she made a mistake that probably saved a life. The mistake was small. She picked up the wrong chart. It was a Tuesday morning at Naval Medical Center San Diego, and she was starting her first solo rotation on the 4th floor surgical ward. The charge nurse who was supposed to walk her through the assignments had been called away to a family emergency at 6 in the morning, and the coordinator who replaced her was new herself, and so by 7 o'clock, Maya was standing at the nurse's station with a clipboard and a granola bar she hadn't finished, and a quiet, familiar feeling she had learned to call professional caution, but which was really just plain nervousness, dressed in better clothes. She looked at the board. She picked the lightest chart. Room 412. She did not know, at that moment, that the name on the chart was not the patient's real name. She did not know that the girl sleeping in room 412 was the daughter of a 3-star admiral. She did not know that a man named Dennis Farrow had spent 5 weeks planning something terrible, and that this particular Tuesday was the day he had chosen to do it. She just knew room 412 had the lightest chart, and she was tired, and she wanted one easy morning to find her footing. She walked down the hall. She pushed open the door. She introduced herself to the girl in the bed, who was 19 years old and barely awake, and had the eyes of someone who had cried recently and then decided to stop. Her name, according to the chart, was Anna Kelly. Her real name was Sienna Crane. Maya did not know the difference. She checked vitals. She noted the post-surgical numbers. A routine appendectomy performed the night before. Clean margins. No complications. She refilled the water pitcher. She answered a call light down the hall and came back and checked the IV line and answered Sienna's question about whether she could have something for the pain. She could. Maya gave her the medication, watched her settle back against the pillow, and for a moment, they were just two young women in a quiet room with the winter light coming through the blinds in long pale strips. And Sienna asked Maya how long she had been a nurse, and Maya said, almost a year, and Sienna said, that was not very long, and Maya laughed and said no, it really was not. Do you like it? Sienna asked. Maya thought about it. She had a habit of actually thinking about questions before answering them, which people sometimes mistook for slowness, but which was really just honesty being careful. Yes, she said, most of the time. Sienna nodded like that was the right answer. Then she asked for the television remote and fell asleep with it still in her hand, before Maya had finished adjusting the blinds. Maya was at the window when the shot sounded. It came from the stairwell at the end of the hall, a single hard crack that had no business being in a hospital, and yet her body understood it before her mind did. She was already moving when she heard the second one, closer, and then shouting that she could not make out, and then a sound that was not a shot, but was something heavy, hitting something hollow, and then nothing. Later she could not fully account for what happened in the first 4 seconds. She had no memory of deciding anything. Her hands were on the IV pole, pulling it back from the door. Her shoulder was against the bed, pushing it toward the far wall. Her mouth was already at Sienna's ear. "Wake up," she said. "Stay behind me. Do not make a sound." Sienna came awake with the specific clarity of someone whose body has decided that sleep is no longer safe. She did not cry out. She did not ask what was happening. She looked at Maya's face, and whatever she found there was enough, because she moved exactly where Maya guided her without a single word. Maya brought her to the narrow alcove behind the bathroom door, a dead space, 3 feet of wall between the bathroom entrance and the exterior wall of the room. It was the farthest point from the hallway door, and the only spot in the room that could not be seen from the doorway, even if the door opened. She put Sienna against the wall. She put herself in front of Sienna. She thought, for one strange second, about the laminated drug interaction chart still sitting in her left breast pocket. She had carried it every shift since her first week of nursing, because she didn't trust herself not to need it. She thought about it now, not because it mattered, but because the mind does odd things when it is very frightened, and her mind had landed on the most harmless object it could find, and decided to think about that instead of the alternative. The supply cabinet was on the far wall beside the door, a rolling unit, chest high, heavy when full. She had checked it herself that morning. It was full. She left Sienna in the alcove and crossed the room. She moved the cabinet without sound, leaning into it slowly, letting the wheels roll inch by inch across the floor tile until it was flush against the door. She pressed it there with both hands. She felt the resistance of it, the weight, and then she pressed harder until she was certain it was not going to move without effort from the other side. Then she went back to Sienna. She fit herself back into the alcove and pressed Sienna gently behind her and faced the room. The door handle moved. She felt Sienna's breath stop. Her own had already stopped. She watched the handle turn, a slow, testing rotation, and she did not look away from it, and she did not move, and she put one hand back to find Sienna's arm and closed her fingers around it, not because she was afraid Sienna would run, but because she needed Sienna to know that she was still there. The handle jiggled, stopped, jiggled again, harder this time, then footsteps, moving past. Maya stood there in the alcove with her hand on Sienna's arm and her eyes on the door for a long time after that, long past the point when the footsteps had faded, long past the point when a second set of footsteps, heavier, more certain, came down the hall, and then a third, and then voices she recognized as voices in control of themselves, which was different from the other kind. She waited until someone knocked on the door and identified themselves as security, and identified themselves again when she did not immediately respond. She waited until she heard a third voice confirm the all clear, in the kind of flat, practiced tone that meant it was actually clear and not just hopeful. Then she stepped out of the alcove. Sienna Crane was crying, but she was doing it quietly, and with a kind of dignity that Maya recognized as something the girl had probably practiced in other hard situations before this one. "You can breathe," Maya said. "I am breathing," Sienna said. "I know. I just thought it might help to hear it." Sienna laughed. It was a strange and a little broken sound in that room, but it was real, and Maya was very glad to hear it. The hospital floor did not return to normal that day. It returned to something that looked like normal from a distance, the way a painting looks smooth until you get close enough to see the individual strokes. There were security staff in the hall. There were administrators Maya had never seen before speaking quietly in corners. There were forms to fill out and statements to give, which Maya did, twice, to two different people with clipboards, and each time she told the story, she noticed it became slightly more orderly in the telling than it had been in the living, which she suspected was just how the mind protected itself. Dennis Farrow was taken into custody at the elevator bank at the end of the fourth-floor hallway. He had not fired again after the stairwell. He had moved through the floor looking for something he could not find, and then he had stopped moving. Two staff members on the floor below were treated for injuries, neither life-threatening. The fourth floor had no casualties. Maya wrote that in her mind, the way you write something you want to keep. No casualties. She held it there. Sienna Crane called her father from her hospital bed at 11:43 in the morning. Maya was in the hall outside, writing in her chart, and she could not hear what Sienna was saying, but she heard the tone of it, the tight, controlled voice of someone deciding in real time how much to tell, and in what order, and she thought that Sienna was probably more like her father than either of them knew. Admiral Thomas Crane arrived at the hospital at 4 in the afternoon. He was in civilian clothes, a dark jacket, and no insignia, and he had two aides with him, who walked exactly 2 steps behind him, and said nothing. He was a tall man with gray at his temples, and the kind of posture that had long since stopped being effort, and was simply the shape his body had taken from decades of deciding things. He found Maya at the nurse's station. She was doing paperwork. She was always doing paperwork. She would later think that the most honest portrait of nursing would be a woman at a desk with a pen in her hand, not a woman at a bedside with a stethoscope around her neck. He introduced himself. He shook her hand and did not immediately let go, the way people do when the handshake is standing in for something they do not have a word for yet. "My daughter told me what you did," he said. Maya said she had only done what anyone would have done. Admiral Thomas Crane had commanded 3 overseas deployments, a carrier strike group, and enough classified operations that several chapters of his career existed only in rooms she would never have clearance to enter. He had spent 31 years in the company of people who did hard things in terrible moments, and he knew, with the specific certainty of long experience, the difference between bravery and reflex, and the kind of specific, quiet choice that happens in between. He did not argue with her, he just nodded, once. The way men who have seen enough of the world will sometimes let a person keep the version of events they need to survive it. "Well," he said, "thank you." Maya went back to her paperwork. She finished her shift at 7 in the evening. She drove home on the 163 with the windows down because the air was cold and sharp and she wanted to feel it. She ate dinner standing at her kitchen counter because she forgot to sit down. She called her mother in Tucson and talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular and everything in general. And she did not mention the day she had, and when her mother asked how work was going, she said it was going fine. She did not sleep well that night. She did not expect to. In the weeks that followed, the incident at the hospital acquired a kind of official shape, a report, a citation, a formal letter from the command. Dennis Farrow was charged with 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of making terrorist threats against a military officer. He had carried a grievance about a security clearance dispute for almost 2 years, and somewhere in that time, the grievance had grown into something large enough to bring him to a hospital with a weapon, looking for the name of the man he had decided was responsible for the shape his life had taken. The name had been Admiral Thomas Crane. He had not known Sienna was there. He had not known she was in the building. He had moved through the 4th floor looking for anything connected to the Admiral's world, and room 412 had been the 3rd door on his right, and the handle had moved and then stopped, and Dennis Farrow had walked past and been arrested 14 minutes later at an elevator that was never going to take him where he thought he was going. Maya received the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal the following spring. The ceremony was brief, and the citation was 2 paragraphs, and the words in it were correct but slightly general, the way official language is when it is trying to capture something specific and keeps not quite reaching it. She thanked the people who put the medal in her hand. She shook the hands that were offered. She went back to the floor on Monday and started her shift, and picked up her charts and refilled water pitchers and answered call lights, and did the specific, ordinary, careful work of being a nurse. She was 29 by the time she made charge nurse. She transferred to the ICU before that and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was good at it, good at the pace of it, good at the particular calm it required, the ability to sit inside an urgent moment without letting the urgency take over. People on the floor said she had a talent for it. She thought it was less like talent and more like something she had found out about herself in a bathroom alcove on a Tuesday morning and had simply been living up to ever since. She kept the laminated drug chart in her pocket for 2 more years after the incident. She got a new one eventually, a better one, with an updated edition, and she transferred it to the same pocket. She knew the interactions by memory. She had known them for a long time. She kept the chart anyway. Sienna Crane sent her a letter 6 months after the hospital. It was handwritten, on plain white stationery, in a handwriting that was small and very precise. Most of the letter Maya has kept private. One part she shared later, once, with her mother, because her mother asked what it said, and Maya was tired that day, and said the true thing instead of the careful thing. Sienna had written, "You didn't know who I was. You just knew I was there. I think about that a lot." Maya thought about it too. Not every day, but on certain mornings, when the light was coming through hospital blinds in long pale strips, and the floor was quiet, and she had a moment before the shift fully started. She thought about what it meant to make the right choice before you have time to decide to make it, whether that was courage or training or something that lived below both of those words and didn't have a name yet. She never quite landed on an answer. She went back to work every morning anyway, which she had come to believe was itself a kind of answer, even if it wasn't the kind you could write in a citation or put in a frame on a wall. The medal is in a drawer somewhere at home. The chart is in her pocket. That, she has decided, is the correct arrangement.